Good morning. This is RJ with the IWS Podcast, and I have my man Charles here. Good morning, Charles. How you doing today, sir?
Good morning, man. I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Excellent, man. Thank you. It's good to be waking up with you, starting off my day. Actually, I'm excited to have the conversation.
Likewise,
Um,
likewise.
Beautiful. So, I know we chatted a little bit offline before some of the discussions we were going to be getting into, and just for the for the listeners and the people that may be watching, the podcast is mainly focused on issues of mental health and particularly focusing on men, men of color, because we're largely underrepresented both on the client side and on the provider side. And of course, I'm always excited to have a fellow provider, a male provider, on the show because I know a lot of times we may not have the level of visibility that maybe some of our colleagues may. So I think it's important to elevate that as a part of the discussion.
For sure.
But want to focus on you though, and always want to start by letting the audience and both myself get to know a little bit more about you, some of your family dynamics, and just sort of how you grew up.
For sure, man. So for starters, I am a Delaware native, born and raised, still here. I was born in a small town um, by the name of Laurel, which is Laurel, Delaware.
Okay.
It's in Sussex County, so it's country. I grew up with the farmland and the dirt roads, and it's just a really small town,
Yeah.
country, um, and we did a lot of country stuff. So we didn't have a lot of the luxuries of city life or anything like that. So we just kind of made do with what we had.
Yeah.
Um, but I grew up in what I just knew as being home, but some people might call it the hood or the projects. Um, and I was primarily raised by my mom. My mom was with my little brother's father for uh, the pivotal years of my life, if you will. They were together until I was about 12 years old.
Hmm.
So I grew up with my mom and my stepdad at that time, up until I was about 12 years old. As far as siblings is concerned, I have um, an adopted older sister. I
Oh, okay.
have an older brother that I grew up with, and a sister, another sister that's older than me that I grew up with, and then a younger brother that I grew up with. And then those are all my mother's children. Now, my father has another son who's older than me as well. So I have an older brother from my father as well.
Oh, okay.
And I always feel like this is funny to kind of break down the dynamics of what is common in the Black
Hmm.
community.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
Having siblings from parents got different kids. It's hilarious to me, but yeah, those are my siblings. I have like I said, two older brothers, two older sisters. My oldest sister altogether is my adopted older sister, and then I have a younger brother. We are all adults. I have no siblings who are children.
Oh,
um,
okay.
but yeah, so uh, like I said, grew up primarily with my mom. After my mom and my stepdad split, we moved to a different neighborhood, and from there, it was just my mom. We rocked out, and yeah, man. When I was a kid, just to get into that, I was
Yeah, please.
definitely um, so interesting, man. People see me today and don't believe me, which is the beautiful thing about change and growth and progress, right? But
Hmm.
when I was a child, I was definitely um, out there, man. I was doing the most and getting into a lot of trouble. I didn't really get into any legal trouble per se, but just being defiant,
Hmm.
just kind of doing what I wanted to do. I even attempted to run away from home a couple of times. My mom was like, "Hey, here go your bags." So it really wasn't even a runaway, because when I told my mom I was running away, she was like, "Hey, handle your business, sir. Here you go." Um, so I tried that a couple of times. I've been suspended from school and all that gambit fighting and just a whole bunch of crazy stuff that I got involved in. We used to run around with my cousins around town. Like I said, we was from the country, so we didn't have much to do. We Getting in trouble was fun for us. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that was fun for us. We didn't have anything much to do. So getting in trouble was like the thing to do, to be honest with you. That's really how I grew up, just humble beginnings. We didn't have much. But you know what? My mom, she handled business, man. Like, we didn't have much, but we didn't know we didn't have much. We just thought we
Right,
had
right.
the world. Like, we just thought we were just living the best life we knew how to live. We always had, like, my mom, she kept up with the stuff. So we had like the big screen TVs and, the sneakers and the clothes. My mom would bust her behind working, multiple jobs just to make it work and make it happen. So, that's how I grew up. Real humble beginnings, like I said, didn't have much, but we always had food on the table, always had clothes on our backs, always had shelter, always had shoes on our feet, and had whatever we needed to be successful in school. Um, so yeah, man, that's really how I grew up.
Nah, and that's real, man. I appreciate you with sharing a lot of that. And part of what I was kind of sticking to in my mind when you were sharing, because I hear a lot about those type of stories in our community, and really reflecting on a lot of us coming from single parent households for various reasons. And I feel like you were sort of touching on it a bit about the type of impact that can play as we're growing up. So
Hmm.
just like to give you an example, I grew up primarily with my father because my mom passed away when I was really young. And
Hmm.
so I grew up with, largely male dominated presence in the household. And I'm a big believer in, just in my own experience, that when you don't have that level of balance by having both parents present, not necessarily always in the household, but just even if it's a co-parenting situation, just being very present in each young person's life, that
Hmm.
it causes an imbalance where you see those things manifest throughout a person's life.
For sure.
So like if it's a young man, for example, and I'll speak from a man's perspective because I think that's a lot of the people who listen. When we don't have maybe a mother in the home, so I'll just use myself, maybe we're not as emotionally available or
Hmm.
vulnerable or expressive because we don't get a lot of that level of maybe empathy when
Hmm.
we're growing up. And again, that was a lot of my lived experience. My dad did a pretty good job of being a provider, disciplinarian, structured person, things like that. But anything emotional was really fell to the wayside. And thankfully I had some aunts and whatnot who helped out in that regard.
Hmm.
But if it wasn't for them, like I really wouldn't have a lot of what I know to do today. And then I think the flip side also can be true when you don't have your father in your home. We see a lot of young men, again, particularly from the community, where they may get into a lot of trouble. Maybe they struggle to do well in school, following rules, basic decorum, respect at home, things like that.
Hmm.
So I talk a lot about that as it relates to children and parents and families, because I think that we see those effects, but just sort of not just cognitively, but just in our own experience, understanding there's a correlation. When you
Yeah.
remove any one parent, it's not that one's better than the other, but when you remove one out, there's
Yeah.
going to be some unintended consequences, whether you think about it or not. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate you pointing that out a bit about in some of your lived experience.
Yeah, man. And it's actually like hearing you speak about your experiences. Um, Interestingly enough, my mom was like not that. My mom was not motherly, if you will.
Mm,
My
okay.
mom, so like when you talk about like a lot of times when there's absence of the mother, the child end up typically having some type of emotional deficit. They're
Right.
probably not emotionally developed, or probably struggling in that area.
Hmm.
I struggled in that area even with my mom present. My mom was working, so she was a provider in her
Right.
own right. She was a protector. She was the disciplinarian. Even the years that my mother and my stepfather were together, there still was not much nurturing in the home. So I didn't experience um, really a motherly
Like presence.
presence even with my mom being present, right? And I didn't get that all throughout the course of my life. I think that, like you said, you were able to like lean in and get that experience from other women in your life.
Hmm.
I kind of had to do the same thing, but I didn't get that in my childhood because my aunts are very similar to my mom. So my aunts are also
Mm.
very, harder, and they just grew
Yeah,
up. Honestly, I didn't really understand that I wasn't getting it when I was a kid because it was just a life. And as a kid, you just
of
kind of
course.
you take what you get and you just live. You learn how to live.
Correct.
You survive, you just make things work. So as a kid, I didn't understand what I wasn't getting, but as an adult, I realized that a lot of the emotional connectedness that is important in interpersonal relationships, I wasn't getting. I
Yes.
didn't have that to develop emotionally when I started building relationships and connections outside of my family, and things just weren't normal coming from me to other people. Um,
Right.
and then where people were looking for me to be emotionally available, I didn't have what I needed to even be able to make those connections. It didn't make sense to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, man, my mom was definitely physically present. There's never been a year or time in my life where my mom has not been physically present. But as far as like being that, having that emotional connectedness and helping me to develop emotionally, or being emotionally available, and just that whole piece of life that is extremely essential in a child's rearing, I didn't have that. My mom was not a hugger. She wasn't, holding
Mm.
me. There was not much affirmation.
Yeah.
um, I can't remember too much times that we had like conversations like "I love you" as a kid. Like that wasn't really a thing. Um, so yeah, man, it's that I it's I mean, and it's not funny, but um,
It's interesting.
it's very interesting. I guess if you look at how we tend to uh put on fathers, that fathers are disciplinary and providers, or how we typically put on mothers, that mothers are nurturers, and
Hmm.
more so focused on like child rearing, as far as that emotional connectedness, not having not having that in either parent within the household. um According to society, it's like I'm almost grew up with like two dad figures, if you will.
Sure. No, I could definitely see that. And it's interesting listening to you say that, because I actually had another brother on before, and we talked about that. We talked about from the father's perspective, like actually having both parents in the home. And I phrase it like this actually, because I would put my dad in the same category, like a lot of men, physically present, emotionally unavailable or absent. And so I was talking to this other brother, and he said sort of the same thing. Mom and dad were there, but dad didn't really assume the fatherly role. Mom actually took a lot of those responsibilities on. So
Hmm.
it kind of creates that another level of deficit, like you were
Hmm.
speaking to. But then I've also heard, which is interesting, a lot of situations where the mother has to sort of overcompensate if the father's
Hmm.
not present. So instead
Hmm.
of kind of leaning into their feminine and being more of that maternal, emotional, empathy, warm type individual, that
Hmm.
they might go overboard on the disciplinarian, the level of maybe at times aggressive, but
Yeah.
just really trying to enforce rule, structure, and order. But in my experience, boys don't necessarily respond the same to
Right.
mothers. It's
Yeah.
just I don't know if it's biological necessarily, but it just I've seen a lot of, and I've worked with a lot of young men who there's a lot more pushback when it comes to their mother versus with their father. It tends to not be that way if that's
Hmm.
present, right? But to your point though, it's interesting because to me anyway, when you have both people present, it allows them to sort of assume more or less their natural role, their natural
Hmm.
duty. So not that fathers always have to be like, and I definitely want to always make this point. We're not just disciplinarians or structured people or providers. We can be more,
Yeah.
right? But typically we can lean into that. Like I'm a father as well. I have an 11-year-old. We
Hmm.
can lean into those attributes because it is very comfortable, I think, for many of us to do so. Just like it's
Hmm.
more comfortable for a lot of women to be more warm and empathetic to their children or to their partner, whoever. But when you're missing one of those ones, maybe you think you got to overdo it. And I've
Yeah.
seen those, like you were talking about, I've seen them like at the grocery store, in the neighborhood, things like that. Moms sort of behaving, trying to be like a dad,
Hmm.
but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And then, like you just pointed out, then you're missing that other component of, well, who's going to give me like my softness? So when I need to develop interpersonal skills to build relationships, particularly if I'm heterosexual and I want to build a relationship with a young lady, well, I don't know how to do that because I never built that with my mom. And that's the
Right.
first person I'm supposed to build that type of relationship with.
Right.
So how do I replicate something I've never seen or observed for the first time?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
sort of what you were getting at?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and even furthermore, I think one of the greater issues for me, as I like, just getting older and looking back over the course of my life, and then just even learning more about my mom, and looking at even like other single moms that I know. I think a big issue when it comes to and here's the thing, I judge no one's parenting. At the
Sure.
end of the day, you parent how you see fit, and you parent how you know how to parent.
Mhm.
Just from my experiences is what I can speak of, right? And from my experience, I really do feel like a lot of times, um, if I think about my personally, my mom, I don't even know if it was that she was um, trying to assume the fatherly role
Mhm.
with, at the latter part of my upbringing, raising us on her own. I don't know if she was trying to assume the fatherly role. I think that my mom just was in, like, she was, it's hard for me to say naturally this way, but she just
Mhm.
kind of grew up with this tough exterior. My mom
Sure.
had five, it was 12 of them. She had five sisters, six brothers, right? They
Wow.
lost their mom when I think my mom was like 9 years old, straight into foster care, being passed around through foster care. So she didn't have an experience of a uh, a true maternal figure, somebody who really cared,
Mm.
who
Gotcha.
expressed empathy to her, who gave her that emotional connectedness. So, in a sense, my mom was already growing up emotionally immature and with deficits in that area. So she didn't have it to give. All she knew was to fight. All she knew was to survive. You know what I mean? And to just make
Right.
it work.
Right.
So, when I look at it in that perspective, I think that my mom parented based off of what she had, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Was it the healthiest? Probably not. Was it the most effective as far as, when my siblings and I became adults? No, because we're having to do our own work now to heal from certain things or whatever.
Correct. Correct.
It's okay too, right?
Right.
Because you have to get to that point where you just, take accountability for yourself and you do your work. Um, so there's a lot of just trauma that was experienced all throughout that experience, but just understanding where it all comes from does help, right? I
Hmm.
understand that my mom didn't have she didn't have an experience with motherly women. And so she's only, showing and mimicking and modeling and giving what she was given to give. And
Right.
so, that's, really where it comes from for her. But I see other single moms as well, just from, from other experiences of like within my family or, people I get an opportunity to work with. And a lot of times I see mothers parenting their sons based off of their ideas of what men should be,
Right.
which is no
Absolutely.
different than you.
No, absolutely. What I think is interesting also when you're talking about how to sort of manage what you've experienced when you were growing up and then doing the deeper dive, right? Which I imagine maybe you did in grad school, maybe you did it before and after, trying to analyze what your parents went through, why they maybe did some of the things they did, maybe why they didn't do some of the things that they did, and how to put all that together,
Hmm.
right? I had a very similar experience. I thought a lot about like when you were talking earlier. I think in our community it's sort of interesting. I'll pivot just for a moment. When we talk about things like discipline or consequences or punishment, right? I think a lot of us we kind of laugh about, and I'll speak for myself, physical abuse.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not going to say every black parent does this because I don't want to. I don't think that that's true. We're not a monolith. But I'll speak for my father. My father went through a lot of traumatic experiences. He lost obviously his wife. He lost his mother in the same month. So I think he went through a lot of his own trauma that he never really dealt with for a long time.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of his experience was to sort of take that out on. I have an older sister as well. I think he took a lot of that out on me and my sister as his way to cope, which is
Hmm.
of course unhealthy because we got abused physically.
Yeah.
And so trying to understand that, right? So there's moments where it's kind of like laughing at the trauma. I think a lot of us, like, I don't know if you listen to a lot of black comedians, but
Yeah.
I think we all kind of talk about that type of experience and we laugh. And it's kind of funny now thinking about the things we might have gotten in trouble for.
Right.
But then when you think about it sort of from a clinical perspective, you're like, yeah, but that wasn't necessarily the right example of how
Right.
to conduct oneself. So
Yeah.
then thinking about the next generation, if you have children and I have a child, how do you remedy those situations? And so, and trying to, raise the bar, raise the standard, if you will, so we don't continue to perpetuate this level of trauma
Hmm.
onto the next generation that then has to go back and do all the work that we've had to do and continue to do
For sure.
to move on from these different challenges, right?
Yeah.
That to me is sort of where I talk a lot about with parenting. That's why I talk so much about parenting, whether it's we're married, we co-parent, um, maybe, some cases, obviously some people are widowed, but I want to always dissuade, like when I have let's say a mother who brings a son to me, I'm always mentioning is his father in his life,
Hmm.
because I get this impression at times that fathers may seem to be unnecessary in a
Hmm.
young person's life in general,
Yeah.
particularly for young men, but for young women as well. And I always want to challenge that notion to say, no, you really need both. Like,
Yeah.
none of us should ever be, in my opinion, none of us should ever be as arrogant to think that a child would be better off without both of their parents in their life, regardless of what our personal situation might have been. Like, we can work past that if we
Yeah.
want to really co-parent effectively. But thinking about what you were just talking about with the next generation, it benefits them to have both of those parents involved so we can fall into our roles and our duties, and the kid gets a more balanced experience growing up. I don't know
Yeah.
if you would agree or you want to add anything to that.
Yeah. I would say I think it's from and to your point, I did up until I was 20. What 20? I think I might have been like 22, 23 when I first got into grad school. So up
Mm,
until I was about 22, 23 years old, I mean, I knew that certain things I experienced as a kid wasn't normal and wasn't okay. But
yeah.
for a lot of it, I just thought it was normal and okay. I didn't have the language really for, to be able to differentiate and say, oh, I was being abused. I just thought that a beating was a beating. And we got beat
Correct.
with whatever was around. Like whatever my mom could
Hmm.
get her hands on was what we was getting hit with. Like, and it's just
Correct.
what it was. And you better not say nothing when we leave this house. Like, you better not tell nobody that
Yep. Keep it
this
in the
happened.
house.
So, which is a whole different unhealthy dynamic within our community, but that's a different conversation.
Sure.
Um, but just to kind of like speak to the point, um, I I agree and I disagree, and I'll say it this way: I think that it's important for now, and I'm speaking from my own personal experiences. I think it's
Sure.
important for children to have a healthy mother figure and a healthy father figure.
Agreed.
May not necessarily be your biological parents.
Hmm.
And I say that because my relationship with my mom growing up, in hindsight, was extremely unhealthy. And then my relationship with my father was my biological father, if you will, was basically absent. My
Hmm.
biological father was incarcerated for a good part of my childhood. And even the time that he got out, he really wasn't around as much. I saw him every now and then. It just wasn't, I didn't have an individual personal relationship with him, if you will.
Sure.
Um, just there was just nothing ever really built. I think have more memories of like having conversations with my dad throughout my childhood through a glass or over a table being monitored by correctional officers than I do having
Hmm.
actual personal time with him the times that he was out of jail as a
Yeah.
child, right? So and then even relationship with my stepfather, he wasn't necessarily the healthiest example either. So I have an unhealthy mother child relationship, an unhealthy father child relationship, and an unhealthy stepfather to stepson relationship. Um, and so for me, I think that it is essential for kids to definitely, know who their parents are, know where they come from. But if they can identify or if they at least experience that this relationship is not healthy, I think
Hmm.
that they should experience some mothering or fathering from somebody who's giving it to them from a more healthy perspective. And I
Sure.
didn't get that until um, I was an adult.
Hmm.
And when I became an adult, well, going into my adulthood, there were very particular women. I don't know if I could say names on here, but there were very
Yeah.
particular
No.
women.
Sure. Sure.
Dr. Karen Stallings, my pastor's wife, Lady Nikki McNeil. She, these women were extremely and have been and consistently are very pivotal in my life as mother figures. I call both of them mom, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? And then on the flip side, very pivotal men in my life that I can call, that I can have conversations with, that I can share, my life with, who haven't judged me for the things I've experienced or that I've done, that I've gone through, that have
Mhm.
shown me a level of consistency. And so I have, healthy father figures that I've been able to connect with and have relationships with in my adulthood as well. Primary example, my pastor is probably the primary male figure for me in my life that I look up to as an actual father.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Just having that closeness, having that relationship, non-judgmental.
Yeah.
He'll correct you when he thinks you're wrong, but he does it in love. I never feel less than, or not good enough. I get affirmed by this man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's extremely important that no matter what stage in life you are, no matter what um, age you are, I think it's extremely important that we establish healthy relationships with people who we can at least experience as a mother figure and the father figure, even if it's not our biological parents. So,
Yeah. And I agree with you, man. I've been fortunate. I think it's interesting. I don't know if you would agree, but in some of my, even in my lived experience, I've always sort of identified with mothers a lot because I think we of course seek out the things that we are lacking or missing. And I knew that I was missing that from a very, my mom passed when I was 7 years old. So
mm,
majority of my life I didn't have one. And
yeah.
so I think that I have had that level of connection to, like, whether it was friends, mothers, things like that. And I think it's natural to want to gravitate to get that level of fulfillment from somewhere.
Hmm.
When I say the parenting side, and because I agree with you, I don't think it should be an either or. Because if your bio parents aren't a good example, and or, because this is true too, if they don't want to be present,
Yeah.
you don't want to just be like, okay, well, I had to depend on them, and I guess I don't have anything. What I would say though, and this is just me as a parent talking, like trying to challenge those of us that maybe are parents and are not being present.
Hmm.
You may not realize the effect that you're having on your child by not
Hmm.
being there. And when I say present, I don't just mean physically.
Yeah.
I'm really talking about emotionally, because a lot of us may come from parents households that are physically present,
Yeah.
but again are emotionally unavailable. That to me is a big difference. You have to be willing to be
Sure.
vulnerable. You have to be willing to be expressive and to create the type of relationship that can stand the test of time. It to me is the
Yeah.
parent's responsibility to do that. But if you can get somebody in there to help somewhat fill the void, it's never going to fully fill the void, but to
Hmm.
help, right? Like I said, my aunts, my grandmother, like they
Yeah.
tried their best, and I'm forever appreciative to them. And it's better to get that from somewhere.
Yeah.
But if you could get it, ideally, if you could get it, even if the parents are not together, if they
Yeah.
would be present and work together to raise that young person or young children, depending on how many they have, I think that that would be a great service. And one of the points I made listening to the other gentleman in a previous episode was, to me, that's really the only significant difference outside of like income level that makes maybe black communities different compared to our white counterparts,
Mm,
as a lot of them come from two-parent households. So
yeah.
there's an inherent level of stability,
Yeah.
not just financially, usually emotionally, because one person isn't trying to do two people's jobs
Right.
and also raise a child. And
Yeah.
as a from a parent perspective, again, I think about this myself. It's really hard to raise a child by yourself.
Yeah.
And even when you're trying your best, there is going to be things that are going to be deficient, because men, we are not women, and women, we are not men.
Yeah.
So we cannot fully embrace and embody the other person's duty. We can try,
Right.
right? But we're not going to be able to fully do that. And so I
Yeah.
think it's just understanding that connection and saying, you know what, even if I had an issue with this person, maybe again, personal in nature, let me find a way to put that to the side to make sure our son or our daughter, whoever, they are able to be raised in a more structured and balanced environment that we're both meeting their needs,
Hmm.
And then if you can get some additional mentors or
Yeah.
fatherly, motherly figures in your life, then of course, like, add it. That's assets to the community. It takes a village,
Yeah.
right? Like, that's beautiful. I
No,
hope we will
absolutely.
support and encourage that.
I definitely agree with that, for sure. I think it is I think it is very ideal uh, for the actual parents to provide that experience to the child. I mean, essentially, and that's, where I always have the opinion that I think that a lot of times when people have children, they don't fully understand the responsibility of what it means. Like, you're bringing a freaking human being into this world
Yes, sir.
who you are responsible for nurturing and protecting and covering and cultivating as they go through life and experience what the truth of society in this country is like, right? Let alone as just a human being in general, but as a human being of color, okay?
Yes. Yes.
In this country, and the things that are forever changing when it comes to our demographic. Like, that is a huge responsibility. And I don't think that everybody takes that into account when they're having children. I personally don't believe that my parents took that into account when they had children. If they did, I think they would have been a little bit more responsible, right? They would have been a little bit more caring or just careful. But I truly don't think that I think that there's a glorification that comes from having children, and then it's like, oh, the baby is here and the baby is so cute and the baby is so beautiful and we're holding the baby and we're feeding the baby milk. But at some point in time or another, that baby has to turn one, okay?
Yes.
And their spatial intelligence develops and they start to understand what's happening around them. So then that 1 year old turns into a 5 year old who can now use words, and they're
Mm-hmm.
mimicking everything that you're saying and they're copying everything that you're saying because they don't know any better. They just know that they're hearing you say words and they just learn that they know how to say words. And so they're copying what you're saying, right?
Correct.
And then you have this 5 year old who eventually turns into an adolescent. And in this life that's going on around them, if they don't have morals, if they don't have values, if they don't have things that they are being rooted in, if they don't have a sense of identity and individuality, if they don't have a sense of security in who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and a level of healthy self-esteem, the world is going to eat them up. And a lot of people are not parenting um, from these views. A lot of people are parenting more so to make sure that their child has one of the newest pairs of sneakers or has the newest game, and has the best jewelry at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just, or the best phone, and they're keeping up. But everybody else has an iPhone, so now my child has to have an iPhone. For
Right.
what? What did you instill in this child for them to understand that even if they don't have the iPhone, they still have value? What did you
Correct.
instill in this young lady for her to understand, this little girl, 12 years old? What did you instill in her for her to know that, yes, your friends are wearing makeup, but you're beautiful even if you don't have it, right? And what did we instill in these young boys that, 15, 16 years old? Yes, your friends are out here having sex with everybody, but you are just good enough even as a virgin, right? We're not, these are things that I think that we don't take into account
Mm-hmm.
um, when we decide to have children. I say we, even though I'm not a parent, but just as adults or as people, we don't take a lot of
Right.
these things into account when we have children. And I think other things that we don't take into account is that, suppose your child is born with some type of handicap or deficiency. Like, you have to be committed to the life that is brought into this world to cultivate them
Mm-hmm.
and to really develop them. It's not, I think there's a lot of negligence, and I think that there's a lot of just inconsideration
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to bringing children into this world, which I always feel like is unfortunate because children don't ask to be here, right?
Yes.
They
Yes.
show up based off of the action that two adults did, right?
Exactly.
They show up, and when they show up, they don't always get the attention that they deserve and that they need. So for me, I think it worked out better for me, in my opinion, that I did find healthier um, mother and father relationships in my adulthood. Granted, I feel like it's definitely better that you have those relationships in your childhood, that you have healthy
Right.
mother and father relationships in your childhood, because I feel like it puts you more on par to develop in different areas. Whereas now, um, just the different traumas that I experienced throughout life, and then developing these healthy relationships with motherly and father figures later in life as an adult, I'm healing from certain emotional wounds as an adult when that all could have been done through childhood, right? So I think that, for me, I think that it worked out. And in retrospect, it worked out for me, because I can only imagine how much more hell I would have went through if my father was actually present. Like
Mm,
if I actually had to spend time in my childhood with my dad, who was an active drug dealer, who did his time for that. So I'm not incriminating anybody. He did his time for drug dealing, but he was also an active drug abuser and user. He was addicted to crack cocaine. And so if I had to live, and I think about if I really was raised by my dad, how much more of hell would my life have been?
sure.
I think about, I'm sure I would have been in cars that would have had drugs in the car. I'm sure I would have been just in unforeseen locations. Just don't even know where I
Yeah.
would have been. So I think that, in a sense, there's a benefit to my dad not being present, um, as much as I hoped or thought I hoped he would.
Yeah.
Um, but nonetheless, I think it's extremely important that before we decide to have children, which is, I don't care how old I get. For me, a huge decision maker in me deciding to not have children at this stage in my life, is because I want to have a sense of surety that, one, I'll be able to provide for this human being I bring into the world what I want to
Hmm.
be able to provide, not just financially, but also physically and emotionally and intellectually and spiritually, and not just myself, but also my significant other. I want
Hmm.
my significant other to also, be someone who is able to provide, for this human being that we're bringing into the world spiritually, mentally, intellectually, emotionally, physically, being there, and being able to provide, and being consistent with that. That's a commitment that I think a lot of adults don't take into consideration when it comes to parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. I couldn't agree with you more, especially the when I listened to you describe that, and I'm very big on this, I heard a lot of intentionality, especially on the tail end of what you were saying. And I agree. It's not okay, we kind of in this situation, oops, now what are we going to do? Like
Hmm.
if we could plan it out, if we were working on ourselves, taking good care of ourselves, making sure we're grounded, well-adjusted human beings and adults, that we could raise a child in that environment. But
Yeah.
I find that a lot of us don't do that. We're not coming from environments where we were intentionally planned to be born or created.
Hmm.
So we're just kind of scrambling to figure things out. And I mean, obviously, to be fair to all parents, there's no handbook on how to do this.
Right. Right.
But I agree with you. And I would say to me, just giving my lived experience, it always starts with self. I always talk about like the hierarchy in terms of priorities, prioritizing who's most important. This is the way I say it. You don't have to agree, but this is my take on it.
Hmm.
And that's because I talk a lot about roles. So I always say we're number one. You got to be number one in your life in terms of taking good care of yourself, making sure your needs are being met, making sure if there's deficiencies or challenges you're facing that you seek additional help and assistance to learn how to better manage and cope with those challenges.
Hmm.
So taking care of self. Then if you're in a relationship, then it's you and that person because that's you being well helps you to maintain the foundation of that relationship and you want your partner to be doing the same.
Hmm.
If you're not, there's a great chance it's not going to work for the long term.
Yeah.
And then if you want to have children, then they come after that because the children are predicated on the relationship with you and your partner being good. So if that's
Yeah.
not good, then it's, as we were just describing, it's going to negatively impact the children. So
Sure.
to me, that's my hierarchy. And
Yeah.
it's exactly in that order, one, two, three. And I say all that because if I'm doing these things to be very conscious of the way that I'm not just maneuvering, but the decision making I have, the level of, again, emotional availability I may have, not just to children, to your partner, to loved ones, faith leaders, whatever, people you have around you that are very important to you, being willing to go there, being
Yeah.
willing to express yourself, I think allows us to unlock maybe some of the challenges or deficiencies that we dealt with earlier on in life. And then we're more likely to actually go and deal with them
Mm.
as opposed to continue sweeping them under the rug, pretending they didn't exist, hoping it was just a moment in time
Mhm.
and not realizing it's actually impacting us today.
Mhm.
It's impacting my ability to form a secure relationship with my child, or
Yeah.
it's prohibiting me from really connecting and bonding with my partner, or
Yeah.
I've effectively pushed all my family members away because I don't feel like I can trust anybody. So
Mhm.
I'm sort of on this little isolated island, even though I have all these people around me. I'm really just feeling like I'm by myself. We
Mm-hmm.
don't want people, I'm sure as a, as a clinician, like we don't want people to feel like that or
Right.
to think that's the way that it has to be normalized.
Yeah.
But we're all products of our experiences until, to me, we get to a certain age. We
Mm-hmm.
need to start asking ourselves these sort of introspective questions. Maybe there's some things I need to work on. Maybe there's some things I need to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And my hope for listening to brothers like yourself, like me, and maybe being able to see and witness these conversations is to do just that, to make it feel more normal to say, I look like Charles. I listened to what Charles said in terms of
Mm-hmm.
his upbringing. Sounds kind of similar to mine. I was in the foster care system, or my parents were. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't fault them truly 100% because they're also products of those lived experiences. We know it can be very difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out how to better manage that. I never really wanted to take it seriously, but listening to him made me realize I need to really take a look in the mirror.
For sure.
That is my hope, that listening to this stuff, again, particularly for us,
Mm-hmm.
that we continue to wake up and
Yeah.
realize if there's those areas that we think we should be working on, to please feel comfortable to do it. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with you being willing to go there and address it, because listening to you, listening to me, we're bearing our wounds,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. And if I could say this as well, I think that one thing that we as Black men, I think is essential for us to give ourselves is grace. We are um, we are a highly underestimated, misused, abused, and traumatized demographic. And
Yes,
that's just
sir.
the reality of it, especially in this country. And so there is a lot of life experiences that we have. And this goes for whether you were privileged or whether you weren't privileged, because there are some of our brothers who have lived a more privileged life, but at the end of the day,
Absolutely.
still being a Black man in this country, you at some point in time or another may, and I'm almost tempted to say you will experience some form of a prejudice or racism or trauma or whatever. And however those things impact us, it is extremely important for us to address the issue, or issues. And in doing so, not feeling like there's always an means to it. Like, I think that a lot of times when we approach different things that we're experiencing in our life, or different aspects of ourselves that we're wanting to work through, I think a lot of times men think calculated,
Right.
right? I think a lot of times we think very goal oriented. So it's like, I'm going to achieve this healing, but I'm like, healing is not an
Right.
achievement. It's a journey. It's a process. It's an experience.
Hmm.
And there is a level of overcoming that you will experience in your healing process, but always remaining open, that always remaining open that you may have to continually address these things in your life and continually give attention to them. And so you want to give yourself grace, you want to give yourself time, because healing is a lifelong journey. You're forever evolving, forever healing, you're forever becoming whoever it is that you're becoming, and you're forever evolving. And so I think a lot of times we get frustrated with ourselves for not showing up as this unrealistic perception of perfection that we have.
Right.
And I so want to discount that perfection is even a thing. I want to just kind of tear that down.
Yeah.
That we'll never reach a level of perfection. We'll never be perfect, but we are always evolving. We're always growing. And you want to give yourself that grace and that time, especially when you're doing healing work. That's hard work. It is
Yes.
hard work. It's not an easy thing. You're literally talking about shifting beliefs and thoughts and feelings and behaviors that in some sense has worked for you at some point in time in your life. At some sense, these different aspects of life probably have helped you survive and make it through certain
Hmm.
situations. So you're talking about shifting out of that to establish something that's healthier for you. It's not always easy work. So you want to give yourself the grace, you want to give yourself the time to grow. You want to give yourself the grace and time to just evolve and become the best version of yourself. I understand that it's not easy work. It is some hard work. It isn't a linear or perfect process.
Mm-mm.
There'll be ups and downs. There'll be detours and loop loops. All of that's going to happen in the process. And there, even at some points too, there might be some divergence. You might go back to old ways at some points, right? And it's just all a part of the journey. It's all a part of the process, and it's never too late to be better and to do better. And just taking accountability is extremely important in the
Yes.
process. Take accountability for yourself, take accountability for your thoughts, your feelings, your choices, how you may project things on other people. Just take accountability for yourself and always commit to doing better and being better. I would
Yes.
like to say that for sure.
Now we gotta snap, clap the whole nine for that, because yes, we always trying to do better. There's no such thing as perfection.
Yeah.
We just need to be trying to do better as we can every day in whatever areas we feel like we're deficient or that we are lacking. And again, to me, it's a lot of it comes down to being intentional, which
Mm-hmm.
also means being accountable.
Yeah,
Because if you're being intentional, then you're being accountable to also be putting in the effort necessary
for
to
sure.
make the change that you want to see. And these
Absolutely.
changes can take a really long time,
Yep.
right? Especially, the work that we're talking about that we do. This is some of the most intensive, draining type of work that, depending on your maybe sub area or subspecialty that you focus on with people,
Mm-hmm.
but unpacking a lot of that, right? We
Mm-hmm.
know we know that a lot of us from these communities, whether it's the Black community, Latino community, the BIPOC community as a whole, and
Mm-hmm.
even white brothers and sisters as well, like there's a lot of unseen trauma that we might be holding on to because of the
Mm-hmm.
environments that we come up in, the
Sure.
ways that we're raised. When you mentioned earlier about we don't talk about it, like
Mm-hmm.
I snickered because that was what I was told.
Yeah.
Like you don't let this stuff leave physically this house. It
Yep.
stays right here in this doorway, and then you can only talk about it here.
Yep.
So I agree with you there, and I think that those have to be the areas that we really hone in and focus on. The benefit, I would say, by having people like you and me, and again trying to increase that visibility, is we do know and we do understand as well that culturally, not that we're a monolith. I always say this: we're not a monolith. We're not all the same people, but
Mm-hmm.
there are some certain shared lived experiences
Sure.
that make it a little more comfortable
Yeah.
to speak to a brother or sister that looks like you, and,
Absolutely.
and and that's nothing to take away ever from other people who do this type of work. I think we need everybody in the field,
Yeah.
but I just know that we need more people that look like me and you,
Yeah.
particularly men,
Yeah.
because we're such a small percentage of the people who do this type of work, and yet we are a large percentage of the people who are really walking around carrying a lot of this stuff
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not really knowing how to deal with it, how to manage it, how to engage with somebody. So I'm going to use that as a segue, actually,
Yeah.
since we're talking about it, to talk with you and ask you what drove you or maybe
Hmm.
motivated you to even want to go into the field in the first place.
Oh man, I always love this question because I'm always challenged to make a long story short. um, but you know what? Really, what it was, if I can start at, the inception of how I got
Sure.
here.
I
Um,
want as much as the story as you want to give.
you know, so as a kid, very young, I just remember being, like every kid has their own personality type,
Mm.
right? I was always just super inquisitive. I had to know, you know, I was inquisitive, I was analytical, I was always an observer. Um, and so I always just paid attention to everything going on. So even when my mom didn't think, we knew what was going on. My siblings might not have known what was going on, but I just felt like I just knew what was going on because I paid attention. And I
Right.
was always just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And so I was always super inquisitive, always just analytical, and I was an observer. I just always paid attention to everything, and I was always trying to end that right, and being analytical, and being just this like inquisitive kid, always wanting to know what's going on. I was also a problem solver type of a
Okay.
person. I was always interested in trying to solve. I would find out what was going on, and I always just try to problem solve. Now, a different story for a different day is how my problem solving skills as a kid turned into people pleasing, but that's not what we're talking about right now,
Gotcha.
right? So I always, just wanted to try to, make things better, fix things, whatever the case may be. Now, hear my mom tell it. She'll tell you when I was a kid, I was nosy. I say I was inquisitive. There's a difference of opinion there, right? Difference
Sure,
of opinion.
sure.
But nonetheless, that's kind of just how I grew up. Now, when I was in grade school, they always ask you. Well, back then, I don't know if they do it now, but when we were kids, they would ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? You had to do
Hmm.
projects on what you want to be when you grew up. I never had an answer. I never had an answer.
Okay.
I would end up having to do projects that they would tell me I had to do it on because I never had a response for what I wanted to do when I got. I never wanted to be a cop. I never wanted to be a lawyer. I never wanted to be a doctor or a firefighter. Those were never any of my. They just weren't my dreams.
Hmm.
Um, and so astronaut, none of that. I just had I had no interest in anything that other people had interest in. And so I never really had an answer for it. So when I got older, I just always kept saying, I just want to help people, right? When they ask me, like, what do you want to do when you get older? My response would be, I just want to help people. And I didn't really know what that looked like or what that meant because
Right.
I was never in spaces where I was in counseling. Now, when I was in elementary school, probably like around fourth grade, um, this is also, you know, another part of the story we could talk about another time. When I was in fourth grade, I was mandated into anger management. So
Okay.
um, I was taking an anger management course, and that was my first experience with a counselor in fourth grade. Um, and so I was every day after school, I was in an anger management group with Miss Fitzgerald, who was my anger management counselor. And from there on, I just always found myself wanting to be around Miss Fitzgerald. I felt like she understood me, she saw me, she heard me, she gave me a space, you know what I mean, to just be. And I just kind of like connected with her. So I was always in Miss Fitzgerald's office, even when I wasn't in trouble. I just kind of stuck with her. And, then leaving from fourth grade, going on to another school, I just kind of always clung to the counselors, guidance counselors. We didn't have like, mental health counselors or social workers in school back then.
Right.
But, at that time, they were called guidance counselors. So I kind of
Hmm.
like just clung to them so much. And so for a while, I said I wanted to be a guidance counselor. Um, and that's kind of like how it started.
Okay.
I kind of put I put my personal and my my personality types and kind of saw that that was a place where people could go to get help. Because of course, a kid you're spending primarily your time is spent in school. So I was
Right.
always with these people who I knew were helping people, and I just felt like I could use my skills and just my personality to help people through that. Right. So initially it was guidance counselor, and then when I got to high school, um, I had gotten into a lot of trouble, and I had connected with, a long story short for this situation, I had connected with one of the guidance counselors at the high school who really affirmed me and spoke some words into my life that just changed everything for me. Shout outs to, I call her my mom Sessoms, right? Shout out to my
Hmm.
mom Sessoms. She was a guidance counselor in high school who really helped change the trajectory of my life, off of some simple affirmations, right? There were some very simple affirmations that she spoke to me. I got kicked out of class and was sent to her office, and she just like had me close the door, and she really gave it to me. But through her affirmations, man, it unlocked so many things for me, that just changed my whole view on life. And she just kind of helped me see things greater. She was a guidance counselor, but she pushed me to think greater than that. And that's not that there's
Yeah.
anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with being a guidance counselor. I love guidance counselor. I love what they do. But she just pushed me to, to not think within a box, to kind of just think bigger and to consider that I could become anything I wanted to be in the field. So
Hmm.
that's when I got interested in psychology. Took AP psychology in high school, and then I was like, I'm going on to, went to college and majored in psychology. And then even when I got there, I didn't know anything about mental health counseling. I just knew, psychology was a study of the mind and behaviors, right?
Correct.
So that's all I knew really about. I was so vague and so green. I just was like, whatever I can do to help people. I don't care what it is at this point.
Right.
I'll be a babysitter. I don't care. I just want to help people, right? Um, so as I got into, the major, a lot of my professors were counselors, therapists, practicing psychologists, and just learning from them. they kind of helped me to just continue to hone in on what I wanted to do, which is when I eventually got my master's in clinical counseling. So it was a long journey, from
Sure.
childhood to figure it out. And there were very pivotal and key people along the journey to help me to fine tune it. That's really how I ended up getting into the field. Another influence was my little brother. My little brother, when I grew up, when we were growing up, my little brother was diagnosed with ADHD, and he was heavily medicated. My little brother was like a zombie, if you will, when he was medicated. He was on those early stages of Ritalin, and
Mm,
it was just in my opinion today, he was definitely given a dosage higher than probably he should have had. And so I grew up for a great deal of the childhood, with my little brother kind of like operating as a zombie when he was medicated, for ADHD. And so those also brought on greater questions. I know he had to go see somebody to get this medication. So,
right.
why did they diagnose him with this? What does ADHD mean? So as a kid, like I told you, I was inquisitive. I always just questioned those things. And so a great deal, another influencer for me getting into the field was understanding that my brother went to see a counselor who diagnosed him with ADHD, and I wanted to understand why, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of different influences over the course of my life that helped me to get into this field. And then when I was in grad school, I went to go see my own counselor because they had encouraged, if you're going to go be on one side of the couch helping people through their things, you need to be in counseling yourself. So I went and got myself into counseling myself. Um, and come to find out, I was struggling with depression. I was uh, had my own experiences with trauma, experiencing high levels of anxiety that came from the trauma that I was experiencing, and all of it was so subconscious. I didn't even realize that I was operating like this in the world.
Mm-hmm.
There were just so many factors that really, kind of got me on this journey and influenced me. And I knew that there was a deficit of Black and brown men who were providing services in our community, as such as the services that we provide now. And so I
Mm-hmm.
just kind of gave that commitment that I wanted to be a visible representation, like you said earlier, for Black and brown men to come and have somebody that looks like them, that they can feel more comfortable with, that we can have conversations about the Eagles and Cowboys game, but still get into the real life, the deeper
There we
stuff.
go.
And what I'm saying, just kind of like chop it up and using lingo and language and terminology and colloquialisms that we understand, but still experience a process of healing and come out better than you were when you came in. So
Yes. Yes. Oh man. It's
yeah,
interesting. I gotta say this real quick. When you end some of these sentiments, man, like they hit me really hard because I'm like, I just want to be like, yes, I agree. Like I want to touch. I gotta touch on the last thing you said first
yeah,
because I think that's important to acknowledge. Like because of the demographics that we may work with, there's certain ways we may talk, we may negotiate or navigate therapy and how we do it, and it may look a little different. So I want to give
hmm
another example to what you just said, talking about like the lexicon and the jargon that we may use. Sometimes, for example, I'll get like a young man who maybe doesn't know a lot of the terminology or really is trying to learn how to be more emotionally expressive, right?
hmm
So I may ask them about the type of music that they listen to, because I know for me when I was young, because I grew up also not learning to express myself at all, so I really gravitated to music,
hmm
particularly some of the most vulnerable tracks that I could hear, usually in hip hop, but also like in R&B as well. But
hmm
the point was is that sort of like using them as like my vessel or my vehicle to express what I'm trying to say.
hmm
So me knowing that about myself, I was like, let me try to encourage them to do that. And sometimes that's a way to sort of bridge that gap.
yeah, yeah,
So you might listen to certain hip hop artists, and you might be like, oh, why are they listening to that? But when you break down maybe like the lyrics of what they're saying, you're like, oh, like they're trying to tell you like this is what they're being hurt by. They just
yeah,
don't know how to say it or they don't feel comfortable. Kind of like if you might use play therapy with like a young kid who
yeah,
doesn't know the words, but they when you start playing, they can show you on a doll or whatnot. So I agree with you 100% there. Like we're going to tailor the approach to that individual. Different
yeah,
demographics, different communities, you may have to approach it a bit differently.
for sure.
So I love that you mentioned that, but also the journey. And I always love hearing people's journey because I know that we all have different experiences. Like even as I've done these interviews, some brothers I've talked to, they have grown up in a pretty well adjusted living environment. I'm like, I'm grateful.
Yeah,
I'm truly grateful. I want that to be the norm. I
yeah,
really do. But a lot of us don't.
yeah,
And so, of course, I want to recognize that reality and talk about, where maybe those areas that we were lacking or missing support, love, empathy, compassion, whatever, loss. For me, it was grief. Like when you were
Yeah.
talking about elementary school, going through anger management, I kind of got to that point in middle school. But in the beginning, it was dealing with social workers and grief counselors trying, but I was really young. I had no way to verbalize what I was going through.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got older, I was able to, and I was really angry and upset, but I wouldn't really get in trouble. It was
Mm-hmm.
just like to myself. I would just be mad, like seeing like young men with their moms and,
Mm-hmm.
feeling like there's something wrong with me that I didn't have that,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to learn how to reconcile that within myself. Like, did I do
Wow.
something wrong? Why am I being punished? Type deal.
Wow.
But I remember those individuals who always tried to talk to me and tried to take me out and uplift me and give me some encouragement, because I was always a good student, even though I was harboring all of these feelings. I didn't know what to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a while. I would forget like what those people's jobs were, kind of
Yeah.
like what you were talking about. Just like, I know they helped. I know
Yeah.
they would come take me out of class and they would just check in on me and ask me if I'm, how I'm doing. And I remembered that I appreciated that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then as I got older and I started to try to formulate what I wanted to do, same thing like you said, wanted to help, trying to think
Yeah.
about how I wanted to do it. I thought I was going to go into law,
Yeah.
and because I wanted to help criminal for like criminal defense. But thankfully, when I was in undergrad, I had a advisor who pointed me to a mental health counseling program at my school, University of Central Florida here in Orlando, and that sort of helped me solidify that it was a real job role that I could
Mhm.
do, because I completely forgot that that was like a thing.
Yeah.
I knew these people existed, but there's different ways, there's different type of providers, and obviously different ways we're trained. We know that now, but
Yeah.
then I didn't know. But the point was, it's interesting that both you and I said that we kind of got touched by these people earlier in life, and maybe it didn't fully resonate, but some
Yeah.
part of it clicked in our mind. It was like, oh, like I remember what these people did, and I like that, and maybe I could do something like that one day. And then
Mhm.
maybe it just kind of lay dormant for a while.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it sort of resurfaces as we get older. Like you said, taking that good old psychology course, and you're like, ooh, this is
Yeah.
interesting. This is kind of on the wave. I think I want to go down.
Yeah.
And then maybe that then takes us to the point where we end up going for that master's.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that sometimes you go through hardship and you go through different levels of trauma or loss or what have you that might be.
Mhm.
But sometimes we might connect with those people who were there, who
Yeah.
helped us, and that seems like it's led not everybody but a lot of us into the field, which I
Yeah.
think is good. It's like having that some representation. But I would take it a step further, seeing
Mhm.
people like me and you maybe doing that again for maybe some young men out there. They
Yeah.
might say, oh, I didn't think that that was even like a real career.
Yeah.
And then but then they see it, they're like, well, I saw this guy Charles, he was talking about his journey and he did that, or talking about me and he did that. Maybe that's something that I might want to pursue. So
Yeah.
that's why I think it's good to to talk about these things.
Absolutely, man. And it's actually interesting. Now I'm teaching a course at my alma mater from undergrad, Delaware State University. Right. I'm teaching Intro to General Psych, and we have some students. I'm teaching a summer course for an academy they have, kind of helping the freshman class get ahead of the game before their peers come
Beautiful.
in August, right? And so, in the intro to in the class I'm teaching is Intro to General Psych, like I said, but there's like math majors in there, some business majors in there,
Hmm.
art majors in there,
A lot of
different
people
majors.
in those classes.
You know what I mean? So it's not all. I thought it was going to be all psych majors, but it's not. And now I have like and we're only 2 weeks in. We just finished our second week of the class yesterday,
Okay.
and the students are like, oh, Mr. Professor Charles, how do I change my major to psychology? I'm like, hold on, wait. I get that you
Getting
may cut
excited.
because I talk like we have like I have a system to how I teach them, right? So I explained to and you probably remember Intro to General Psych. It's a very dry course. It's not
Yes.
much excitement that you can bring into Intro to General Psych. So what I do is I basically start off the class. I give them the first 10 minutes to get into class or whatever the case may be, and then they sign in, they get settled, and then with that open up the class with talking to them about just like life at Dell State, right? I tell them, give them some tips on do's and don'ts. Yesterday we had a conversation about like friendships, whatever the case may be. So
Mm-hmm.
we, open up the class like that, and then we get into the lesson. But the lesson, I bring real life experiences the best way that
There
I
we
can
go.
into the lesson. Now, the hardest thing to do is to make classical conditioning and Ivan Pavlov relatable. That's the hardest thing to make that fit real life
Oh man.
experiences in college. So I've had to do some deep digging and research to make that thing work, but we made it work, right?
That's
Um,
awesome.
and yesterday we were talking about like cognition, thinking, intelligence, memory, things like that, and just bringing interactive things into the lesson. So like they're like, oh, professor, how do I? And I had to explain to them. I said, you know what, I want to give them. I had to have more realistic conversations with them about like what the field is actually about and what some of these courses are going to look like. Not all your classes are going to be fun. Like you're enjoying this because I'm bringing real life into it, but not every
Mm-hmm.
professor is going to do that. Not every. And so,
Correct.
what is your true like dying love for what you want? If you really want to be a business, you probably should stick with business, right? And it's not to deter them from the field, but I think that they find me interesting and they find my teaching style interesting, and it
Mm-hmm.
makes the content interesting to them. But as far as like the actual field, I did deter them, from changing their majors because I'm like, I don't think you're really in it for the long haul, right? You're
Yeah.
enjoying this class, but you're probably not really committed to the actual mission of the field of psychology. You're probably more
Yeah.
so really committed to, the field, the mission of business or the mission of art education or wherever your major is. So
Yeah.
that's been an interesting ride itself.
No, man, and I like that you. Number one, I didn't know that you did that. I like so now I can take this conversation in a slightly different direction because before I fully went on practicing mental health counseling by myself, I was in higher ed for about
Mm,
4 years as as an advisor primarily. But naturally, it's kind of hard to turn counseling off. So
mhm,
I was very much taking a more comprehensive, somewhat intrusive approach to
mhm,
students and always being big on, like you were just talking about, helping people find really what their passions are or what they really
mhm.
want to commit to for the long term. Because you
Yeah,
might have any class that might seem intriguing or
yeah,
interesting. And like you said, it could just be that you have a dope professor that just made the information, the material more palatable.
mhm,
But when it comes to some of the other coursework that may be more rigorous, and you
yeah,
may get somebody who's dry, like you still got to make it through that because the
yep,
end goal is you want to do that career.
yep,
So being able to sort of weigh those out, not just being like infatuated with one really cool class and realizing, there's much more that's going to be required of me to
yeah,
go down this path down the long term. But I like that you were talking about teaching though, because I've talked a lot about, I don't know what your experience was. I can imagine, but being in Delaware, I didn't have many Black teachers in school. I remember at elementary maybe having like, I think there was one female. I know I've had like, a couple like PE teachers throughout like K through 12. And I remember having one Black professor, and it took me till I got to grad school. Beautiful guy though. Loved, like, we had some of the most engaging. It was a multicultural counseling class. Very, very engaging topics in his approach for sure.
mhm,
But it was just interesting because again, we're talking about representation at the same time. I think it has to be across the board. You need to
mhm,
see brothers like you also teaching
yeah,
and being a provider if if you want to balance those two,
yeah,
because sometimes you get to bring in those different experiences, and that might be the difference, might be,
yeah,
between somebody not going in the field and choosing
sure,
to go into the field, not because they didn't want to, but they just didn't see it, and maybe they thought, oh yeah, maybe you've heard this expression, we don't do that.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
maybe they didn't see Professor Charles, and they're like, well, yeah, I guess we don't teach, or
yeah,
we're not providers, or we don't go into psych like that. So let me not even entertain that as an idea, even though I want to help people too.
yeah,
So I think it's great that you are also walking sort of in those two spheres, because I think you might be influencing, the next generation. I have no doubt
yeah,
of
yeah.
potential providers by the type of classes that you're teaching.
Oh yeah, man, definitely. And it's a similar experience when I was growing up, second through 12th grade. Well, actually, if I can go back further, pre-K, um, my one of my pre-K teachers, was actually Miss Sneed. So if you can see my name here, Sneed. So it was my father's cousin, was one of my pre-K teachers. So I did have a black teacher in pre-K, in kindergarten. Um, but second through 12th grade, I had one black teacher, was a woman, Miss Handy. She taught English in seventh grade. Um, and then there was another black teacher in high school. Her name was Miss Giles, but I didn't have her. Right. So in the entirety of my second through 12th, when we talk about grade school,
Mm-hmm.
all 10 years of grade school, second through 12th grade, I had one black teacher. One. Right. And when I went to um, college, I went to an HBCU. So it blew my
Oh, okay.
mind, right? Dell State is an HBCU. So it blew my mind. It just had, like, it just blew my mind. I can't even describe it really, but it was like almost like just the time to be alive type of feeling, to have these
Sure.
instructors in front of you. And they didn't, a lot of the instructors, it wasn't just like, let me say this, okay? There is something about our culture that is very, good, bad, or indifferent. There's something about our culture that is very family oriented,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And when I went to class, I just felt like I was with my family. The instructors, like, they had high expectations of you, because at the end of the day you're doing collegiate work, and they didn't hold any punches. Like, like, it was definitely hard, to earn my degree, but in the same time it was just like the level of care, and that they just wanted to see you do well, and you
Mm-hmm.
believe that they had your best interest at heart, and you just connected with them on a completely different level. um I can't even. It was just a beautiful experience altogether. And when I'm like working with the class that I'm teaching, this is my first time being a college professor. I've never taught a college class a day in my life. I literally started 2 weeks ago, right? So I'm fresh. But when I'm going into it, right, as I'm going into it, I keep in mind the experiences that I had with those black and brown professors when I was
Mm-hmm.
at Dell State. And I bring a lot of that into the classroom. So, like, even my teaching style, I'm just remembering how Dr. Scott Jones made forensic psychology and abnormal psychology and personality psychology so interesting. I'm remembering how Dr. Rich made research methods so interesting. I'm remembering how, Dr. Rogers made statistics interesting. I'm just remembering how these different experiences with these different professors,
Yeah.
at this HBCU. And keep in mind, too, not all of my professors were black and brown, but they taught from such an enriching place that made it intriguing for black and brown students. They believed in the
Yeah.
HBCU mission, so they taught just from a certain place, that even if they weren't black, you just believed that
Oh
they,
yeah. They were bought in.
you know what I mean? They bought into, just the culture. So it was a beautiful experience. And so that's what I, you know, vie to give these young people that experience. Like yesterday, there's one student in my class who I overheard him, the first week of class. After class was over, I overheard him, talking to one of his other classmates, and he was telling me about how, like, he has this business. He creates, he does like graphic hoodies, and well, he
Oh,
started with
okay.
graphic hoodies and whatnot. And so yesterday I purchased one of his hoodies. He was like, "Oh, I gotta record this. I've never had any of my teachers purchase any of my stuff." Right? I believe in the student. I believe in his brand, and it's like, you have a good mission for your brand. I'm like, look, I purchased a hoodie, and he didn't even know it, right? But when he was like, "I need to record this. Like, can I record it?" I was like, perfectly fine with me. But it's just making those connections that are
Yeah.
gonna, like, these students, these kids are gonna remember. And that conversation I had with him was like, just keep going. Like, just keep going. Like, people are gonna buy into your vision. People are gonna buy into your mission and what you're really trying to do, and the message that you're trying to get out there. But never give up. Like, if this is what you want to do, this is the type of business that you want to get involved in. Like, keep going, expand your brand. And those are the types of conversations that, I just remember having at HBCUs. At my HBCU, I remember just the professors being more invested in you as a whole person rather than just you as a student in
Right.
their class.
Oof.
and really wanting to see you do well. Like to this day, I got that position as a professor because I got a personal phone call from Dr. Scott Jones, who was also one of my professors, and I'll say her name a lot because she was very pivotal in me getting into this field. Um, but she was one of my professors when I was at Dell State. She was also the department chair at that time,
Oh, okay.
um, and so she wasn't my academic advisor, but she was my research advisor when I did research at the university. She wrote my letters of recommendations, which helped me to get into Howard. I'm going to Howard in the fall. Pray for me.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm going to Howard in the fall, pursuing my clinical psych PhD. So Dr. Scott Jones wrote me a letter of recommendation for that. And so she called me with this opportunity to teach. She was like, I think this would be a good opportunity because when you go to Howard in the fall, you may have some responsibilities to help as a teaching assistant, teaching some freshman classes. So she was even looking out right then, helping me get the skills that I need before I show up to Howard, right?
There you go.
You know what I'm saying? So it's just that type of connection that I got from that experience at an HBCU, and I'm trying to give that same level of care into the students that I'm teaching as well. So I definitely think that representation of us in the classroom is extremely important for our young Black boys and girls. You know what I mean? I just
Absolutely.
think it's extremely important.
No, man. I love that. Man, you hit me with so many gems right now. Number one, again, congratulations and shout out to you, man, for taking
Thank
that
you.
next step in your educational career, which I'm sure will only impact in a positive way your clinical career and
Thank you.
any other direction that you want to take that in. Because again, the representation does matter, and knowing
Yep.
that we're out here trying to get it. But one thing I want to hit on that you just said, because I think about this from like a therapy approach too, is it sounds more to me when you're describing the way that your professors were with you at Dell State, you got a holistic experience
Yeah.
because they didn't treat you just like a student. Maybe because I'm gonna get to this in a second, but maybe because they can identify with some of your lived experiences. They're like,
Hmm.
he may need more
Hmm.
than just the grade or
Yeah.
the feedback about his test or his quiz or his paper.
Yeah.
There's some game that he needs to learn, that he might need to understand, because maybe they had a lived experience
Yep.
that when they were in school they didn't have anybody talking to them, or maybe they didn't come from a family dynamic where everybody sought out higher education.
Yeah.
I didn't ask you this question, but actually let me ask you before I continue.
Hmm.
Did anybody else in your immediate family are you the first, or has anybody else sought out higher ed prior to you?
So my sister, she graduated high school 3 years before me.
Yeah.
She started attending a private college, and she went for about a semester, and then she left to go back home and help
Yeah.
my mom out financially. So she worked and helped my mom out financially. So I was the first of my siblings to graduate from college.
Okay.
My sister graduated from college 3 years after I graduated because she and I actually, when I graduated from my master's program, she was graduating with her bachelor's degree also
Got
from
it.
Dell State. And we graduated a week apart from each other. So I graduated a week earlier than her. It was a beautiful time, man. It was a beautiful time.
No,
And my
absolutely.
mom, of course, my mom loved it. But yeah, so I was the first of my siblings to graduate college. I wasn't the first to go, but I was the first to graduate.
Got you, got you. And I had a feeling, that's why I asked, because I was the first. My sister also went before me, but then she left, and then I definitely was the first one in my family to go the whole way. My father,
Hmm.
he is a nurse, but he got like his associates, and then he was able to stop. I had
Hmm.
to go like the whole way through the bachelor's
Yeah.
and beyond. But I say that because when you don't have, sometimes, when you don't have those people there to give you those examples of like, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to expect, these are the rules, then it's again, it's hard to do things that nobody's kind of giving you the game to, that's
Hmm.
giving you the feedback and the experience that they've already had.
Yeah.
So again, having somebody like you, I'm going to sort of try to make an equivalent, you getting your doctorate and then maybe you going back and teaching, right?
Hmm.
I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm going to say something, you just let me know if you would agree.
Yeah.
So the way that I approached doing advising with students was, I would take a lot more time with Black and brown students because I knew that a lot of them were the first generation. I
Hmm.
know a lot of them didn't have the guidance that they needed, which is why they made a lot of preventable mistakes.
Hmm.
And so I tried to give them a lot more attention because I
Sure.
remember what it was like for me when I started, and I didn't have, not that my advisors were terrible. It's just there's certain questions they didn't know to ask. there were certain things that they weren't privy to because that wasn't their lived experience to
Mhm.
maybe inquire further about.
Yeah.
I imagine you being in that field and you getting that additional education, maybe coming back and teaching further, that you might take a similar approach. Don't want to put words in
Sure.
your mouth, but I want to ask you: do you think that that's sort of your disposition when it
Oh
comes to
yeah,
things like that?
absolutely, man. Like it's and 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 I'm not always politically correct, so I don't want to come
That's
across,
okay. I'm
uh,
not either. I'm not either. I'm trying my best.
you know what I mean. I'm not, so I don't want to be judged by what I say, but what I will say is I feel like um our other racial and ethnic and cultural counterparts,
Hmm.
uh they're good. They're good. And I think that they have a lot of people in advanced positions that are going to make sure that they're okay. We don't have the same number of people in advanced positions to make sure we're okay. The number is far and few.
Yes.
And so I definitely know me being me, and this has nothing to do with me being a teacher. This has nothing to do with me just being a therapist. These are the things that I practice in my profession. But me being me as a person,
Hmm.
I'm always checking in to make sure somebody's good. Did you get enough rest last night? Did you get enough? Did you eat? Are you okay? Like what happened? What did you what went on between yesterday and today that that something happened with your family? Like I'm always like that's just me as a person,
Yeah.
caring about the whole person. And so I know for sure I'll bring that part of myself into the experience. Um, Not even just as a as a practicing professor, but even as a student going to be in the program, like amongst my cohort, I've already started a group chat, make sure everybody good. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, so it's just I know that I'll bring that into my experience as a professor, and even now, like I bring it into my experience just to get into the whole person, and to make sure that they have what they need ultimately to be successful. Right?
Hmm.
I want you to get this content. I want you to understand what it is we're talking about. I want you to be successful in this course, but I want you to be successful in life. And I want you to be
Yes.
healthy. I want you to be well. I want you to be okay, right? If there's anything that you need, if I have it, I want you to understand that I will do my best to give it to you. And if I don't, I'll point you in the right direction. I'll give you the resources that you need to be
Hmm.
successful, right? So yeah, so I definitely, for sure. To answer your question, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
No, I had a feeling, and I'm glad you said that. And I think that this is just my opinion, but especially those of us that are fortunate, but also worked really hard to get to the positions that we're in, whether it is
Mhm,
completing graduate school, continuing on further graduate education, teaching,
mhm,
working, however we out here getting it,
mhm,
to be willing to look back and trying to give the next generation the game.
mhm.
Right. That's literally how I would say it to them. Like, especially when I was advising, I'm like, I'm trying to
Yeah,
give you the game
for sure.
because I didn't understand it when I started.
Yep.
There's a lot I didn't know, and I want you to be better off than I was. And so
Yeah.
let me, we're only going to be beneficial if we share.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
having it all up here don't do anybody else any good
Yeah.
except for me. So I want us to this, and again, that's sort of a platform message of why we are here. But
Yeah.
I love the fact that you said that, and I'm glad that I can say with confidence that your future students will obviously benefit from the immense
Mhm.
amount of clinical, personal, and professional experience that you're going to have, and that you're
Wow.
going to bring into the classroom and make the content relatable.
Yeah.
I can't stress that enough. My favorite professors were the ones that took the theoretical and
Yep.
made it practical, because
Absolutely.
sometimes it is really hard
It can. Yeah.
to make it
Yeah.
relate. Sometimes you're just like, man, this is dry. Like, I,
Legit.
I mean, I'm going through it, but it's like, man, this is painful to have to listen to. But
Yeah.
some people, when I've had older, I've actually honestly preferred older professors
Mhm.
because they bring their life into it and they're telling, they're spitting game about what they've experienced or what they've witnessed or what they've observed, and
Mhm.
being able to put those together. Man, you talk about being engaged.
Legit.
Like
Yeah.
I'm here, I'm with
Yep.
you. So I'm very confident your students will benefit, and I hope that again other brothers and sisters out there who may be interested, whether it's pursuing higher education, working in the field clinically, or maybe a combination of the two, that we
Mhm.
encourage that and see it is possible. Right, listening to people like you that are out here getting ready to start that next chapter in your academic career.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
super exciting. Which I'm going to segue a little bit,
Yeah.
going back to more of your, like your clinical experience, and I want to ask you, just as a man and as a Black man who works in the field, which we know again we are a very tiny percentage.
Mm-hmm.
What has your experience been like so far in your career? Practically.
That's a loaded question. My experience has been insane. um, Man, so when I first started, um, well, I'll say this: like I've had some opportunities from like working in the field. Prior to getting my master's, I've done like some work in the field, but I count more so my experiences after I got my master's.
Yeah,
So, um, or and even in the journey with like practicum and internship and whatnot, I
sure.
count all of that. But my journey has been crazy, man. Trying to think of where to start. I think my first experience while I was earning my master's was with practicum. So my practicum placement was at a forensic site, and I was working with court mandated sex offenders,
Mm.
and we were doing groups, and I think I set myself up for failure. I set
Why do you
myself
say
up
that?
for failure, and I say that not because of the population, but I set myself up for failure because I'm well. Let me kind of make this my disclaimer. I'm completely independent, right?
Okay,
So I don't have any level of dependency on any side. I, living with family, that's not a thing. Receiving financial compensation from family is not a thing. So I worked full time in
mm-hmm.
Delaware. Um, so I worked a full time job in Delaware, which is where I reside, and I was commuting after work to school in Pennsylvania. Okay,
Okay,
and I was attending class from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. And then I was driving back to Delaware and figuring out time, finding time to study and to get work done and to write papers, just figuring it out. And
sure.
I did that for 3 years. So in the midst of me taking classes, working full time, commuting to and from class, I also had to, at that time, commute to a practicum, which was also in Pennsylvania. So there were more days of commuting. And so I think I just set myself up for failure because I was exhausted. I was
Sure.
burnt out. I was just trying to make it happen at this point. So I was showing up and I wasn't fully present because of just being so tired at that point. I think my main focus
Understood.
was to stay awake. Right at that point, I'm all of my energy is being put into just staying awake for the time that the time that I have to be here.
Looking
Um,
alert, right?
just trying to look alert. And so when they ask me questions, I'm like, I really don't know what to say right now, but you just make it happen, right?
Yeah,
So I think that I did myself a disservice because I just didn't, I didn't think things through. I knew, I was going to pursue this degree and whatnot, but I didn't consider, how tired I might be and how much, my full-time job was going to take out of me. But I had to work this full-time job because I had a car and I have an apartment, financial responsibilities that have to be taken care of. So
absolutely.
I wasn't fortunate enough as some of my peers. Now, the grad school I went to Eastern University in Pennsylvania, and it is a small private. Um, uh, I can't remember. I know it's a religious school, but I can't remember exactly uh,
Guys, denomination.
what denomination they ascribe to. But nonetheless, it was very quaint, and my peers didn't understand some of my peers didn't quite understand my experience because they were living with parents and they were, their tuition was paid for and I'm taking loans out and stuff like that.
Right,
So,
right.
or, they were older people who had already had a career and they were, their spouse was taking care of everything while they were just at school, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any of that opportunity. So, um, my experience with practicum was rough. I didn't get good feedback from my supervisors. I did not get good feedback. So that was a rough experience, actually, to the
Sure.
point to where I had to, in all honesty, I had to defend myself for the university to allow me to continue in the program. That's how bad my reviews were. So
Wow.
that was an experience, and that was a and I share all of that because that was a real moment, and that was a game changer for me to check myself to say, you know what, like there are certain things you're gonna have to sacrifice to um to be more present, to be more available, to be more aware, to be more alert, to be well rested, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to function properly and healthily while you're in this experience. Because right now, your priorities are your job and education. So everything else is going to have to get cut out. All this extra stuff you're doing for family, all these extra things you're doing for friends, all that is going to have to come out the picture because it's taken away from your ability to rest and get what you need to be, present. So
Mm-hmm.
after I had to defend myself in the university, and they that was like the hardest thing I had to do. Like honestly, like for them to determine or decide at that point if they were going to allow me to continue the program. I was like, man, like, and the crazy thing was my grades were perfectly fine. I didn't fail any of my courses, Um, I never went anything lower because they had a plus minus scale. I never went anything lower than a B plus. So academically, I was doing very well. Um, but it was just that review from my supervisor at the time at practicum, saying that I was disengaged, I wasn't fully aware, they felt like I wasn't connecting with the work that they were doing, um different things of that sort put me in a bad
Mm-hmm.
position. So my first experience clinically was not good. It was not a good experience. um and then after that I made it through that. Thankfully the university allowed me to continue. um so making it through that, I got into my internship was at an outpatient practice in Delaware, thankfully, so I didn't have to keep commuting while I
Sure.
was interning.
Cut that time
Oh,
down,
the
travel
hour
time.
and a half was put into actual sessions at this point. The hour and a
There
half
you
was a
go.
drive.
There you
Well,
go.
I'm actually doing sessions, right? Um,
Right.
Started off, my internship started off as a great experience. Um, it was interesting. I told my supervisor and my internship that I did not want to work with children because the program I was in was geared towards adults. So I was like, I don't want to work with any children. I want to work with adults because these are the things that I'm learning about adults. My very first client was a 4-year old,
Ooh.
a
There you
four
go.
year old who was a kicker, screamer, biter, spitter, all of those things,
Mm.
right? And that was very interesting. I was literally in the session sweating, trying to figure out how to handle this kid. And his mom, I made his mom be present. I was like, man, you can't leave him with your child because he's like kicking and stuff, and I don't want anything to be said that I did anything. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
she was there, and I had her handle him while, but there were sessions like probably about a good month where as soon as he would come in the door, it would be complete just outright tantrum and outburst, and there was no words being said. So 60 minutes of trying to figure this out for like a month or so, and then eventually we were able to get him calm enough to where we were able to get some
Oh.
work done. So. Um, that was interesting. And then actually, after I graduated, in the process of graduating from Eastern, my internship had offered me a full-time position, so I took that. And that was like my first real experiences in the field as a clinician. Now they came with some challenges because the practice that I worked at was owned, or it is owned by, and not this is a bad thing, but the practice is owned by white people, and they have primary white uh,
That clients.
in their clientele, right? Their practitioners and clientele is primarily white. And so, you know, people calling in and, you know, wanting to see a therapist and being told that they're going to see Charles, and I walk out to the lobby and they're expecting somebody completely different. Uh, that was interesting. I've actually had a few people who saw me and said they didn't want their child to see me, right?
Mm.
Because of I was a completely different picture than what they expected. I've had
Right.
some people who are bold enough to say that to me directly, right? Some people would wait until after the session was over and they would tell the receptionist, like, hey, we want to change our counselor. We weren't quite expecting, Charles to be who he is, whatever. Um, But I had some people come back and like they're like, oh, I'm not even gonna lie, like I didn't expect to see you. Like when I think of Charles, I think of like an older white man with a sweater on, and here I am, jeans and a
Mr.
t-shirt.
Rogers vibes.
Yeah, I got like jeans, a t-shirt, and a snapback. you know, so it's like they weren't expecting that, but it worked in my favor too because I was able to bring a completely different demographic to that practice, which is really what I think kept me there as long as I was, because Black people were not coming there before. So Black and
Yeah.
brown people started coming to the practice. I just brought a whole new demographic. So my experiences within the field have been quite diverse. Thankfully, when I left the outpatient practice, I went into the school system, which is what I do now, providing mental health services within different school sectors. I started off in an elementary school in Delaware, and I, was with them for about 7 months before I got a promotion to coordinate a clinical program in New Jersey, which is what I do now full time until I go to
Oh,
Howard.
okay.
So yeah.
Man. Okay. Whew. Love the story, first of all, man. Because I was listening to you, man, you taking me back. You taking me back to some of my own experiences.
Yeah,
Okay.
man.
I, I
You
gotta,
gotta
I
give the
got
good and the bad. I'm trying to give the good and the bad, right?
no, 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 but it's good. No, no, listen, no, I want us to hear it though.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna give you some back. Hopefully this will resonate with you because when I was listening to you, a lot of stuff resonated with me. Trust me.
Yeah.
One of the things that you first brought me to, because you were talking about sort of the observations that faculty were maybe having or supervisors were having on your behavior, and then communicating that to the school, right?
Hmm.
I had a similar experience when I was it was pre-practicum. I was like just before practicum, like 2 semesters before, and I worked at a substance abuse facility, like an hour from me, right? I'm gonna connect this to like the burnout conversation you
Hmm.
were talking about. So my
Hmm.
program was very similar in that like our faculty told us very early on that we get together at the end of each semester and we review every student in the program. And
Hmm.
any person, professor that has you, they give feedback about you. And if they get like several people who talk about concerning behaviors, then they're going to
Hmm.
pull you in to discuss it.
Yeah.
So that's the premise, right? So I'm working at that facility. The hours were crazy. It was I would never do it again. It was 5 a.m. to 1:30 p.m.
Oh wow.
and the facility was like an hour and some change away from me. So I had to wake up around like 3:30 a.m. to get
Wow.
there. And yeah, and then I would go to school after. So then technically I had all this time, but of course I was tired, I was exhausted, and then I would have class at like sometimes like in the summer it would be earlier, so it'd be like 3:30, 4 o'clock. I'd have to go into practicum later on, like right before I left the job. So you talk about mentally being drained. I would literally drive to the school, park in the garage, try to take a nap, and I literally had professors like knock on my window and wake me up and say, "Hey, I'm getting ready to start. You need to get up."
Oof.
So like, and just trying to get it where I could get it, right, get some
Yeah.
rest whenever I could, and then of course to be present. And I had a similar experience where that I had some professors that expressed some concern,
Hmm.
same thing, and they were like, hey, we want to make sure, like, are you okay, what's going on, we're hearing that you seem like you're a bit more disengaged, your
Hmm.
work isn't exactly the exact same caliber that it typically is.
Hmm.
And I told them, I'm working full time because, as you said, I'm independent. I have nobody to rely on. A lot of my peers were married or in relationships, or they lived at home, so
Hmm.
they had somebody taking care of them. I also had my son was really young at that time, so I was trying to navigate all of that and just genuinely being exhausted. And I was like, hey, I can't afford to not work here. I will try to do a better job though of balancing this as best as I can, like making sure I'm getting the rest as much as I can. And they
Hmm.
were very accommodating, to be fair to them. So
Yeah.
I was able to continue as well. But going back to those moments and those memories, I think about those because that's part of the challenge, right?
Hmm.
Being on our own, maybe having to take on more of that financial load while you're still trying to study.
Hmm.
It's obviously a lot to deal with. And then when you start talking about your internship site, I worked at an outpatient private practice in my internship for both semesters. And I remember also it was a largely white area
Hmm.
demographic, you could say, that most of the clientele would come from.
Hmm.
And me being there, obviously a lot more black and brown people started coming, definitely more men and more
Yeah.
boys. Like most of my clients were young men and boys, because obviously, most parents would want to, match them in that way.
Hmm.
And interestingly, my youngest one that I got was 5. And same thing, I was like, a lot of the young ladies I was in school with, they're like, oh, I want to do play therapy. I want to do play therapy. I'm like, we would do that in practicum a little bit.
Hmm.
And I was like, that's not really my vibe. I want to work with like, adolescents because now, number
Legit.
one, they can communicate a little bit more. But also, I feel like I can have a greater impact with them. But I had a 5-year-old. Didn't tantrum as much, but it was fundamentally challenging. Like you really have
Yeah,
to have a level of patience and I would say admiration to do play
for
therapy and
sure.
things like that because it's very different than what
Yeah.
we probably do working with teenage and older individuals. So I can definitely empathize with you there. And I just thought it was interesting when you were talking about that experience being a man and being in these different spaces and who ends up coming to the
Hmm.
practice as a result. Now, I didn't have anybody sort of have this out of body experience seeing me show up.
Hmm.
Definitely, there was some looks like, are you the therapist or are you like we had I had this other role where I was a mentor. It was actually a
Okay.
paid position, a therapeutic mentor, working in tandem with a therapist.
Hmm.
So sometimes they thought I was doing that, but when I got to internship, obviously I was practicing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting perceptions of
Legit.
like who should be doing this. And then again, you
Yeah.
talk about names, right? Well, yeah, you think about that name. You're very well spoken, eloquent brother. So somebody might be like, oh yeah, Charles,
Yeah.
white guy's gonna show up probably.
Right.
No, it's not. So being okay with that, being okay with some of the challenges people may have with their own prejudices of like,
Yep.
can he help me or can he be an effective therapist with my child, with my husband, with me?
Hmm.
I think those are important things to acknowledge. But one thing I'm happy that both you and I said was that a lot more males seem to be a bit more engaged or
Hmm.
present, or maybe we got sought out or matched simply
Yeah.
because we were.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more room to be done, no doubt. But
Sure.
that was something that like I would say the initial seed started to get planted of
Absolutely.
maybe I need to start working with this group because what I'm hearing is there's not a lot of us.
Hmm.
And my supervisor told me that, like my clinical supervisor or site supervisor, she told me that very quickly. She was like, there's not a lot of people like you that are in the field. So
Hmm.
just keep that in mind because, I'm going to try to match you with other brothers that look like you
Hmm.
because we had like a not court mandated exclusive population, but we did have a certain amount who were like, we would usually call them like the pre-trial diversion group. So
Hmm.
like the young people maybe had like one incident, not a history of repeated,
Yeah.
illegal behavior. So they go through therapy for a prescriptive amount of time. And
Hmm.
then if they get favorable reviews, then they won't get a real charge or they won't have a real record, that type of deal, like keep them out of
Yeah.
jail. So I did stuff like that. So that I got matched with a lot of those types. And that's when I started to realize like, oh, okay, there's definitely an importance and a need there.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked the question because I think it's just very interesting because there's not a lot of us that do this type of work.
For sure.
And so I think when we do, we tend to get matched with this overwhelming amount of young men because there's so many of them that really need the help. But again, the ratio is really off. There's not enough RJ and Charles is out here
Legit.
to meet the need yet. So I always like to encourage people who may be listening and thinking about maybe coming into the field, like, man, we really could use you. And these
Yeah.
clients out here could really use you.
Yeah.
So I just think it's an important point to mention. And
For
I
sure.
did want to ask you, kind of keeping on that same line of thinking within the field and with some of the demographics that you've been able to serve, have you noticed like any common presenting issues maybe by demographics? So like if you're working with largely white families or couples or individuals that they may present with these type of things, with black people they tend to present with these type of things. Has there been any commonalities you've noticed like in your clinical practice?
Ooh. Um, I think the greatest commonality in the clientele that I've gotten, whether it was with the outpatient practice or even in the school, excuse me, complex trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And I know that sounds very general, but that has been the greatest commonality for the demographic that I've worked with primarily as far as Black and brown people is concerned is just layers and layers and layers of trauma,
Yeah.
whether it's physical trauma or emotional. It could be by way of just living in a neighborhood or living in an environment where there is a lot of gun violence or physical violence or whatever. Just a lot of trauma
Yeah.
is the greatest commonality that I've come across when it comes to working with Black and Brown people. Not even just like the children, but also the adults as well.
Sure.
Um, I'm working with some clients now because I also see clients individually right now, virtually, and working with some clients right now who experience their greatest levels of trauma. From from their expressions, their greatest levels of trauma from being incarcerated and the things that happen when you're imprisoned.
Yeah.
So helping them work through those things and process those emotions and just the reality of what they experienced has been some of the greater things that I'm seeing now. But definitely for Black and Brown people, I think the greatest commonality that I've come across or engaged is um, trauma, but also the impacts that trauma have had on them, causing them to experience depression, causing them to experience anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
causing them to want to isolate, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I would say trauma and its effects is a huge commonality for sure.
Okay. And I would definitely agree with you there. I've had my fair share of from those demographics, especially. And like, yeah, to me, a lot of it's that sort of unactualized trauma. It's the stuff that you just sort of been pushing to the side,
Hmm.
or maybe it's sort of beneath the surface and you might know something's off, but you don't, again, know how like a way to verbalize or
Hmm.
any way to identify what those particular triggers were or the experiences were until you start working through it with somebody.
Hmm.
But I agree with you. I think that on a to try to give a positive note, I'm going to go back to a question I normally ask, but I feel like we answered it already. One of the benefits to me, I feel, or silver lining, if you will, from summer 2020, post George Floyd, and a lot of those protests and things that we had to witness and experience, a lot of those tragedies, was that a lot of folks from our community started to wake up and started to realize a lot of the hurt and
Yeah.
pain that they have gone through. And slowly but surely, it seems like there's becoming a sense of being more acceptable to
Hmm.
talk about these things and to be okay saying therapy is an appropriate way to address and deal with those
Absolutely.
concerns. Like,
Yeah.
not, I try to listen and immerse myself in Black culture in terms of what a lot of our, whether it be celebrity influencers, politicians, what have you, just trying to listen to, like, what are they saying, what's the
Hmm.
messaging here. And I feel like I'm starting to acknowledge and see a bit more openness to
Yeah.
not only acknowledge one's flaws, hardships, traumas, just challenges they've had to experience, but then also couple that at the same time with, and I have a therapist that I see every week, or,
Yeah.
and I've gone through therapy and I'm encouraging other brothers and sisters or anybody out there to go get that help.
Hmm.
So that to me has been sort of the silver lining, although I would agree there's been a lot of that complex trauma that I think has been placed there for quite some time in many
Hmm.
of our lives. There seems to be much more of a openness and less reluctance to hold back anymore,
Yeah.
and just sort of push it away and hope that it's just going to sort of disappear,
Yeah.
which gives me, as a provider, it gives me a bit more excitement.
Yeah.
That's why I like talking to brothers like you, because I know the more of us out there that do this type of work and the visibility that we have, the more normalized it will be that
For
this is an
sure.
appropriate way to deal with one's issues. And
Absolutely.
so I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that is extremely important that we continue to create that space. Like you said, it kind of got unlocked in the height of very unfortunate situations with like George Floyd, Philando Castile, so forth and so on. The names just go on,
Hmm.
hashtag after hashtag, and I think that, like you said, there was a sense of an awakening for us as a community that these things are not normal and they shouldn't just be accepted as much as maybe the government or politics or the society or other cultures and other races try to make us accept that this is a reality. Like, this is not normal. I shouldn't feel this
Right.
way. I shouldn't have these fears. I shouldn't, you know, as a parent, you shouldn't have to be so, you want to be concerned about your child's well-being, but you shouldn't be so afraid that your child can't go out in their own yard or in their own neighborhood and play around with their friends and be a kid, right? And to be a
Yeah.
child, just live a child's life. Like, we shouldn't have to go to grocery stores and look over our shoulders when we're trying to just pick up simple things in the produce section, right? So these are just things that I think, like you said, kind of unlocked in us, that it's important for us to face the realities and to do the work to process through and work through the realities of what it's like for us in this country and the things that we experience. I think it's also important for, um, with that also, I would like to say it's extremely important, um, that we kind of get away from traditional perceptions of therapy. And and when I say that, I can remember therapy and counseling being used as like an insult or a punishment in our community. Like, if you keep acting like that, or if you keep doing that, I'm gonna send you to counseling. I'm gonna put you in counseling, like as a
Right.
punishment,
Right.
or as an insult. We would say, "Oh, you need counseling, or you need to be in therapy," as an insult, right? And I
Correct.
think that is a big problem in our community, and I still hear people say it today, and I cringe, right? If I'm in the, I could just be around, and these people don't know me from a can of paint, right? But they don't know I'm a therapist, but I cringe when I hear people say, "Oh, you need therapy. You crazy. You need to go to counseling." Like,
Right.
why do we constantly correlate this crazy terminology, right? That term or that word crazy,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
and in an insulting way, telling someone that they need to go to counseling, as if counseling or therapy is a bad thing, as if healing is a bad thing, as if becoming a better person is a bad thing, as if unearthing those feelings that you have within you that are probably causing a lot of your physical health issues, right? The stress that you're hoarding within your body, causing you to experience hypertension and high blood pressure. Why is it bad for you to go talk to someone and unearth those feelings and process through them to become a healthier version of yourself? Why is that an
Yes.
insult, right? Um, so I would love for us as a community, as we continue to have these awakenings and these experiences that are, kind of pushing us and encouraging us and helping us to get to that space where we want to acknowledge and process through our emotions, that we also do our due diligence and no longer using counseling or therapy as an insult or as a punishment within our community.
Absolutely, man. Cannot agree with you more. Like just the fact that we still connect crazy or
Yeah,
being crazy with that, again, it sounds like it's like a consequence instead
yeah,
of realizing, like you said, it's a journey to healing.
yeah.
And it's a process, that it's a large process to undertake for anybody to undertake,
Hmm.
regardless of your background or what you've gone through. And to not have that sort of negative connection or correlation to say, well, because you need that, again, I would almost take it a step further and say, for those that might say, oh, well, if you need that, then that means you're weak or you're weak minded. You shouldn't need to do that. You should just be strong. You should just be able to persevere. Right. Because I've heard that a lot. You talk about like, man, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, and I cringe. And there's been times where I've had to confront. I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
You can't say that. Like
yeah.
I can't stand by and watch you tell somebody that and say, well, you need to just be able to stand strong. Just to give an example, if you lost a loved one,
Hmm.
stand up, be able to bear all that weight on your shoulders, and you shouldn't need anybody. You shouldn't even cry. You shouldn't even
So don't
cry.
be, so don't be a human, right? And
Right.
I think that's the greater part of the issue. Is just like we're requesting people to not be who we naturally are. And I think this is where, when it comes to stigmas within, when it comes to stigmas of mental health, it's like we're literally expecting humans to be robots. We're
Right.
literally expecting humans to not innately respond or express what we were created with. Every person that's created, like I tell people all the time, when it comes to stigmas about mental health, like we were all created with physical bodies, which is why we have physical health, which is why we go see doctors about our physical being.
Hmm.
We were all also created with the mind and with emotions, which is why we have mental health and emotional health. These are things we were naturally created with, and you should have someone, no matter how well or not well you're doing in life, you should have someone that you can go and have a conversation about what's going wrong in your life, as well as what's going right in your life, and how do you
Hmm.
adjust and process through those emotions. Right? Counseling is not only about the time that you're experiencing depression because you lost a loved one or you're grieving because you lost a loved one. Counseling is also for those times where maybe you got a promotion on your job and you don't know how to accept that somebody sees you in a positive light. Like you're struggling with that emotion for whatever reason. You're struggling with that experience. Like it's not only about what's going wrong in life, but also what's going right in your life. And I think a lot of times we always make it so a lot of times in counseling we can make it so clinically based that we forget that life transitions are a real thing, and a lot of times it's hard
Hmm.
for us to adjust through life transitions, and it's important for us or good for us to have somebody who is trained in having these conversations to help us walk through these different life transitions and adjustments that we're experiencing that we might be struggling with going through. So I think to your point, it's just extremely important that we do work to break those stigmas. And like for me, I it's hard for me getting clients, especially young clients, um, who are coming to therapy as a punishment. Like I have a young man that I'm working with right now. He's 12 years old, and it's so hard to connect with him in therapy because he's being made to come to therapy as a punishment, right? And
Right.
I've had to
Right.
have conversations with his parents, like you guys keep putting him on a schedule, but I'm literally sitting here staring at your 12-year-old for 60 minutes because he doesn't want to talk to me at all. He's literally unresponsive because he's here as a punishment. I literally just had a breakthrough with him, if you will, right? This past, it was Wednesday? Wednesday. I saw him on Wednesday. And here was the
Mm.
breakthrough. Okay. And I've been seeing him for a few months now, but here's the breakthrough. The breakthrough was I said, listen, all right, as much as you don't want to be here, okay, I don't want you to have to be here as a punishment. I don't want you to feel like you're seeing me as a punishment and that I'm in on you being punished, right? Because I
Right.
have nothing to do with what happens in your house. I have nothing to do with your mom and your dad. But I said, while you are here, I want to make it worth your time and worth my time. And I want to at least have some type of a conversation. I done played Uno with this kid. Like you said, remember you talked about earlier, you said something along the lines of just like listening to the music that they listen to and being able to whatever, being able to connect with them on that level. We
Right.
played Uno. I gave him my phone and I pulled my Apple Music up. I said, whatever you want to listen to, put it on or whatever the case may be. We listened to his music and played Uno during that session. By the time we finished playing Uno and listening to his music, we had a whole conversation about why he likes the artists that he likes, and the things that they rap about. And we were able to talk about how he connects emotionally to these artists.
There we go.
So sometimes we do have to step outside the box when it comes to these treatment modalities, right? And not do
A
everything.
100%, man.
You know
I'm
what I
with
mean?
you.
For
I'm with
sure,
you.
man.
It's
So so I it makes it like, for example, and like I was saying, it just makes it harder for us um, as clinicians when we're getting clients, particularly in younger clients who are being made to come in as a punishment. We're not really able to do our therapeutic work
right.
when a kid is being made to come in. It just makes it so much harder to connect or even get them to buy into the experience.
Yes.
um, so I think if we really break those stigmas of using therapy, break those stigmas and bad habits of using therapy as punishment or as an insult, we will better be able to service our communities and better be able to benefit each other, right?
Yes.
If we
No, no.
really truly do believe that our family member or our friend would benefit from therapy, I think that there's a way to communicate that and there's a way to express that in a way that's not demeaning, in a way that is not condescending, in a way that's not out of punishment or out of insult. There's a way to go about that, and I think that if we explore those different ways, we'll better benefit the people that are in our lives.
No, man. I couldn't agree with that last part any more than I do right now, especially because of what you said from helping to make those things feel normalized and taking away the stigma really helps make it easier for therapy to be approachable. And then
Mhm.
your point about not equating it with a consequence. Because I agree with you, man. In my clinical practice, like I'm a big believer when I'm doing a consult, just the consult with somebody. And sometimes I'll get, like a mother or a father who wants to bring their son to me. And I'll talk to them because, of course, they have a vested interest in their process. So I
Mhm.
want them to know what I'm about. But I very much am like, I need to talk to him or her
Yeah.
because I need to know that they want to do this.
Yeah.
And I literally always ask that. I'm like, if you're making them come here, I just need you to understand because I'm a parent too. I need
Yeah.
you to understand they may not find this to be the most beneficial
Yeah.
because you're forcing them to be here. If you had a conversation with them and tried to help invite them
Yeah.
to want to participate and engage because perhaps it will help them lead a better quality of life or
Yeah.
maybe get out of their own way in certain regard. That to me is a very tangible way to leverage therapy to get some better outcomes, which
For
I'm
sure.
very much focused on the outcome. But when you're approaching it the way you mentioned, yeah, it's going to be really hard because the tone has been set. They're like, well, you
Yep.
got to go talk to Mr. Charles, and he's on our side, so he's
Yeah.
kind of like a spy. He's just getting information for us that he's going to tell us, and then we're going to punish you further.
Yep.
Sometimes that's
Or
what I've heard. That's what they think.
or it's like you keep getting in trouble. I'm a make an appointment with Mr. Charles. I'm like,
Right? Like I'm not the principal. I'm not the dean at the school.
I'm not the cops. Like,
Right.
stop doing
Yeah,
that.
and I'm not the police. So don't put me in that category. You're gonna
Right.
make it harder for me to do what you want me to do,
Exactly.
sir or ma'am.
But you know what? I
So
think
I'm big on
it's
that.
even interesting too that it's like almost they make like it's like people make essentially then it becomes like I'm making you addressing your problems or things that you're struggling with a punishment,
Yes.
which is a deeper
Yes.
problem.
Oh yes.
I'm making you talk about your feelings a punishment,
Yes.
which is a whole different level of which would cause someone to suppress their feelings,
Yes. No,
right?
100%. 100%. Actually, I want to say that. Let me do that like a little PSA real quick.
Yeah.
If there's any parents out there who think that it is appropriate to force your children of what age? This could be grown children too, because I have adults as well. I don't just have minor children.
Yeah.
Um, if you think it's appropriate to take your children and force them to go to therapy under the guise that they're doing something wrong and that this is the punishment for what you're doing, you're to me not only are you minimizing the opportunity to address those concerns at that time, to Charles's point, you could be setting them up for a future where not only do they choose to suppress, but they may have such a bad experience in their mind,
Hmm.
they may not ever go again
Hmm.
when they really need it.
Hmm.
And if they have somebody who does need help, maybe a friend, a loved one, whatever, they might discourage them from going to therapy
Yep.
because they're like, well, I had a terrible experience. Well, my mom and my dad made me go, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
I had this guy, it was bad. I didn't learn anything from the experience. So let me
Yep.
not do that. We as parents, we cannot afford
Hmm.
to make that the norm. I'm
Hmm.
just I have to say it just like that. We cannot
Yeah.
afford to make that feel normal because you're taking away that person's opportunity to really do the work, to really move past a lot of those challenges that they're having. But
Yeah.
then I'm thinking about who they may impact later.
Hmm.
It's not just about them.
Yeah.
And then you could take it a step further, Charles. What if they have kids?
Mm.
What about those children? So
Yep.
who's gonna make sure that they go talk to somebody? Oh, no, 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 no. I did that when I was a kid. It didn't do
Hmm.
anything. So I am
Hmm.
not sending my son or my daughter to go get help.
Yep.
So then now we're creating this new norm of this negative cycle of trauma that we're experiencing, and we have no effective ways to deal with it. Is
Yep.
that wise parenting? I would say no.
Exactly. And to your point too, it's like they could say, you know what, I'm not going to send my child because that didn't work for me when I was a kid, or I'm going to do what my parents did, and I'm going to send my kids as a punishment,
Right.
which just kind of continues the issue.
Yes.
Kind
Yes.
of,
Either way, those are not
yeah,
helpful or they're
at
not
all.
healthy
Yeah.
at all. So no, I agree with you, man. And I
Like
and I love
supporting
that
your
you brought that
child
up.
yeah, like supporting your child and expressing their emotions, processing their emotions, healing, becoming, working through different things that they might experience, and having a supportive and safe place to go,
Yes.
um should be something that as a parent that you endorse, that you welcome, that you invite, that you encourage, that you
Hmm.
affirm, that you validate, that you confirm, that you um, become a participating part in, right?
Hmm.
I think that is when we as clinicians will be more beneficial to children specifically, but even to families altogether.
No, absolutely. Because we're all bought in on the same idea. We
Yep.
want to help this person resume healthy functioning. We want them
Hmm.
to deal with whatever their primary concerns are or secondary
Yeah.
concerns may be.
Yeah.
And we want to do it in a very warm, supportive, compassionate, empathetic environment. That's
Sure.
what we're always trying to do, right? That's
Yep.
that's the difficult nature of what we try to do is to help that person buy into that idea
Yeah.
that we're very genuine about what we do.
Yeah.
I don't have to work with you. I work with you because I choose to, because I care about you.
Hmm.
I care about what you're struggling with, and I genuinely want to see you better.
Yeah.
But if the preconceived notion from the parent is, well, you got to be here because you're screwing up in this way, and this way, then you're giving them this negative disposition already before they
Yeah.
even probably walk in the door and talk to you, which is uh, automatically and obviously going to negatively impact our ability to connect,
Hmm.
right? To build rapport with them because they might just sit there real guarded in their chair or on the couch and not feel like they should open up to you
Yep.
because they're trying to figure out like what's your angle,
Hmm.
what are you really trying to do, what's your are you like trying to spy on me on behalf of my parents, are you going
Hmm.
to tell on me?
Hmm.
And it can make it harder
Yeah.
ultimately to do what we do. So if there's any parent out there, I think this section of this conversation is really geared towards parents.
For
If you're
sure.
thinking about getting your child involved in therapy, whether they're a minor or an adult, please consider the way that you're talking about therapy or counseling with your child, because it's important for them to understand it is not a punishment. It should never be a consequence. It's
Hmm.
actually an added value tool that can
Absolutely.
help both the child and you to have a better relationship with them,
Yeah.
right? It can truly benefit all parties involved. But if we're going at it with this idea that if you do some poor decisions,
Hmm.
that we're going to send you to somebody to go talk it through, you're not going to make it good for the child to be open to the experience, and then
Hmm.
you're really going to make it harder for us to do
Yeah.
what you want us to be able to do.
Yeah.
So I think that that's important. But I will have my final segue here because we're going to end on a higher note.
Yeah.
And you touched on this, you touched on a little bit already, but I want to give you your opportunity to really showcase a little bit more about what you got going on moving
Hmm.
forward. So in the future,
Yeah.
I know you talked a little bit about school going in Howard in the fall, which again, congrats on that.
Thank you.
What are some of the ideas you may have in mind of how you want to leverage maybe your education or just further ambitions in the field that you want to pursue?
Absolutely. So, um, as I continue to just like, learn and go into, go further in the field, I definitely have dreamt of uh, philanthropic work. Um, and so I know that a great deal of how I will utilize my doctoral degree is going to be for philanthropic work, doing a lot of community mental health engagement and education in our in Black and Brown communities, underrepresented communities more specifically, about mental health and providing services at affordable rates for those who may not be able to, um, uh, you know, may not be able to afford insurance or may have insurances that a lot of providers might not accept, or even just to do like, I've always think about doing like just psychoeducational type seminars in communities, and just
Hmm.
kind of speaking to communities at large about how they can take better care of themselves mentally and emotionally, and providing those types of services, even if it's not individual counseling that I'll provide, or therapy or even like psychological services. I do want to just go into communities that are underrepresented, underserved, and make it like a whole thing. Like, I mean, like have food and bouncy houses for the kids, vendors, and just like have full like community type of events that focus specifically on your mental and emotional health and well-being, and make something engaging out of it where people can walk away with information and knowledge on how they can take better care of themselves, having different
Hmm.
sessions and breakouts that they can do. So that is my my interest when I get into practicing and the field as a psychologist, is doing definitely some philanthropic work, community mental health, definitely continuing in the professorate, as a professor, at a college, wherever I'm at that time.
Yeah.
Um, but also using my brand. I have a couple of brands that I will utilize to help with with the philanthropic work. I have a brand called Color My Mind that focuses specifically on breaking stigmas in the community, in underrepresented communities, about mental health. And also, Brown Brothers is a subpart to that brand, which focuses specifically on Black and Brown men's mental health, mental and emotional health and well-being, and just kind of tackling that from a different angle, focuses specifically on the issues and stigmas that we hold directly towards Black and Brown men when it comes to our mental and emotional health and well-being. So I utilize those brands to really help push and do the philanthropic work in the community and in the world at large, hopefully. So yeah.
Beautiful,
Yeah, man.
beautiful, beautiful, man. I can't support that more. And if there is opportunities for us to support, I want you to make sure that you keep in touch with me to talk about those things so we can, because I know there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And
Sure.
the more support that we can all lend to each other to really do it, I think is going to be incredibly valuable. And even thinking about, like you talked about with your academic endeavors that you're going to go through, but how you want to leverage that.
Hmm.
So being able to, like you said, psychoeducation, this obviously isn't exactly the same as that, but that's sort of the epiphany that I had of why I wanted to start doing like a series like this and really talking about it,
Sure.
because accessibility is a thing,
Yeah.
and affordability, obviously. And
Hmm.
I know that, and I'm sure you've had a similar epiphany, that we can't work with everybody. There's not enough time, and there's certainly not enough resources to do so. So, what else can we do to help impact them in any positive, constructive way?
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to focus on having these conversations and, excuse me, at times be able to have them with fellow providers, because I wanted to kind of let people peek behind the curtain and understand a little bit more about what we experience, how we get into these fields, that
Hmm.
it is possible, and a lot of the common issues that we see. So people might listen to it, might introspectively reflect and realize there are some issues that are there underneath the surface.
Hmm.
And that might almost be, in a way, a psychoeducation moment
Yeah.
to have an epiphany and say, oh, I need to start doing some of this work. I need to start talking to somebody. Or
Hmm.
maybe I start with myself.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I'm always big on journaling with my clients.
Hmm.
So I might say, like, hey, maybe that's something that you can start with. Maybe you can start with some mindfulness practice. Maybe you can start with taking better care of your physical health,
Hmm.
like you mentioned earlier, eating, sleeping better, doing some type of physical activity, having my physical, mental, and emotional health areas a little bit more in balance as much
Yeah.
as I can. And then maybe I build up to talking to somebody. But there's always work that could be done.
For sure.
That's my way of sort of being able to do that give back right now, on a hopefully on a grander scale. But
Sure.
we absolutely, I want to support what you're, the initiatives that you're trying to lead, because I think, at this point in life, there's going to need to be a lot of us that are going to have to contribute,
Hmm.
because there's not enough. So as much as we can do to provide, I absolutely want to make sure I support, and I love what you're trying to do, and I think it's going to be very much needed in the future. So gonna absolutely wish the best of luck to you going to Howard in the fall, man, and hopefully that it goes exactly the way you anticipate. I'm sure it'll be challenging, but
Sure.
I'm sure you'll do great, man. So I'm
Thank
I'm,
you,
gl-
man.
I'm glad you're gonna go down that field, and we'll have another brother walking around, not only with the education and the knowledge, but that truly wants to go back and touch the people,
Sure.
and really keep that connection alive. Being able to sort of translate, sometimes that very high academic, high IQ type language and jargon and lexicon, and
Hmm.
really distilling it down in a way that more common people who are living through those experiences can really utilize in their day-to-day life.
Absolutely. Thank you. I definitely appreciate that for sure, man. Thank you. And shout outs to you, man, for just everything that you're doing with your practice, everything that you're doing with your experience, and just being who you are, and fostering these conversations, which I thoroughly appreciate and have enjoyed. So thank you so much, man. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the opportunity as well, for sure.
Yes, man, absolutely, man. Thank you so much for being here.